Good afternoon. Welcome to the President's Live Briefing. We have about 147 people who have registered to join us this afternoon. Just as a reminder, please do not raise your hands in the attendees section. Please put your questions in the Q&A section of the webinar. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Lemons.
Thank you, Yoshanda. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining me for this live briefing. Spring term's well underway. And just a reminder, as we're swinging into the spring term, that we are still keeping our safety and health really foremost in our concerns. We have our very famous alumna, Sandra Lindsay, the nurse from Long Island, who was the poster child for vaccination, is going to be part of a panel that we're going to be having in a vaccine town hall that's coming up. So keep your eyes out for that. That should be great to have her along with some other great guests. The spring term, since it's underway, sort of leads us to thinking about the fall and the summer. Summer will be an online term, pretty much like what we're doing this spring, but we continue to work on the fall term. I know that we're all eager to get back on our campus, and I think we're going to feel that way all the more as we get close to the time in the spring when the leaves start coming out, and we all have those memories of how beautiful the campus is. So that definitely, leads us to thoughts of getting back on campus, which hopefully we're going to be able to do to some degree by the fall term. You saw the chancellor's email about this. I've mentioned it before. And we are working now very hard on our plans for how we're going to handle the fall term. It's complicated. There's still a lot we don't know about what the fall term will be like. We will have definitely more in-person classes and in-person activities, and we'll be doing that in kind of our Lehman way. There's not going to be a kind of uniform way across CUNY that this will be done, because the campuses are all different. And you could probably, I guess, lump the CUNY campuses into two types. There's the vertical campuses, Baruch, Hunter, John Jay to some degree, City Tech to some degree are largely vertical campuses. And then we have horizontal campuses like Lehman. So we'll be approaching this different, but even within like campuses, other horizontal campuses aren't like Lehman. And they will have different issues with different buildings and different curricula that they're doing. So we have to have our own unique plan, which is what we're doing, and pretty much what we've done all along through this pandemic. Some things we do know, we will be having more in-person classes. We think that many more people are going to be vaccinated. Maybe everybody will be vaccinated by the time we get to the fall term. Don't really know. But in any case, we know that we'll be in a better position than we are now. Nonetheless, we're still going to have a lot of the same health concerns that we've had. And as I mentioned, vaccination, it's possible that by May or June, the FDA will remove the emergency approval and make the approval for some of the vaccines, the Pfizer and Moderna at least, permanent and regular approvals. That could change the way that vaccinations are viewed within the university in terms of whether they're mandatory or not. I don't really know if that's going to happen, but I think it's reasonable to think that with approaching now 50 million doses out there, that there will be a lot of experience and the FDA may change the status. And I think that would possibly change our policy, but I don't know. But the one thing I do know is that whether it's an emergency approval or not, we all need to get vaccinated. You maybe noticed that John Kennedy Jr. Lost his Instagram account today. He was suspended because he continued to spread false information about the coronavirus and coronavirus vaccines. Still doing that on Facebook, and he has a lots of followers who are listening to him and others like him that are spreading a lot of false information and raising lots of fears that are not warranted about vaccinations. It's not that there may not be some risks that we'll find out about the coronavirus vaccines. That's always possible. And there are always some remote reactions that happen, very unusual ones. But whatever those are, they haven't shown up in any significant degree yet. You may have seen an article in the New York Times about thrombocytopenia, and it's possible something like that is associated, but the incidence of that among vaccinated people is the same as in the general population. So the causality isn't known. Even if it is, it's something like, as I recall, 30 cases out of the close to 40 million the vaccines that have been administered. It's small. Whereas the risk of the virus is very real. And we have those in our community at this very moment who are struggling with having COVID-19 and having a really tough time. So the risks of the virus are so much greater than the risks of the vaccine. There's really no question. Let's all get vaccinated as soon as we possibly can. I wanted to mention something else, that the CDC just issued new guidelines around masks. And one of the things they've said very clearly is masks need to fit tightly around the face. That means forget those exposed noses, which are not only look ridiculous, but are ridiculous. And if you're going to do that, you might as well just get rid of the mask. No gaps around the mask. That's very important, because if you think about where the air is going that you're breathing, if there are big gaps around your mask, it's not going through the mask. The air that you're breathing in and out's going around the mask. So the CDC is also advocating double masking, use of a surgical mask with a cloth mask, or KN95 with a cloth mask. And I think that would definitely be recommended anytime you're going to be where there are lots of people that you may not be able to keep a distance from as much as you'd like, even outdoors. So I just want to raise that because, and I think we'll continue to say this to those on campus and those that will be coming on campus, that wearing a mask is going to continue to be important, and it's going to be required, and it's got to be worn in a way that really keeps everybody safe. So be prepared to hear a lot more about that. But let me change topics now and move to budgets. We have a fiscal year 21 budget very close to being approved. It will be approved by the Board of Trustees on March 1. That will have a 5% reduction from the state approved budget from last April, not the 20% reduction that we have been working with. So that's good. That's an improvement, and the funds that have been held back by the state, those 20%, we expect to be released and then have them available to us. So that really does help us a lot on our budget situation. It's still a 5% reduction, which is no small thing, but it's way better than 20. The remaining CARES Act fund will also be released then right after the board approves the budget. We don't know exactly what that allocation will be like. We've submitted lots of reimbursements already for costs we've incurred, but we hope to see more of those funds then after that budget gets released in early March. The planning for the next fiscal year, which begins July 1, is well underway. What we have been told by the state is that we should plan on a 5% reduction continuing, so that the amounts that we have will be the same amounts pretty much that we have in the FY21 budget. That's with 5% reduction continued. But there is a big caveat, and that is the state's not funding the mandatory increases that are part of that budget, which means that the reduction in the next fiscal year will be more like 7 to 8%. Now, that's not an approved budget. That's the executive budget. The two houses of the state legislature, the Senate and the Assembly, will be releasing their own, what they call one house budgets in the next 2 or 3 weeks. And then, of course, there's a legislative process, but we're really not that far from April 1 when the budget needs to be approved. So there'll be a lot of horse trading going on until then. But that's what we'll be planning on. And then by April 1, we'll know pretty much what we really can plan on. At least we hope so. There's still a wild card because the Biden administration is hoping to have a new stimulus package through Congress around March in time so that there will be no loss or no gap in unemployment benefits and other benefits. So if that happens, the Biden administration is pushing really hard for funding for the state and municipalities, and the significant amount of money that could, I think, improve our budget picture. So despite the fact that right now we're looking at probably a certain 7 to 8% reduction in the next fiscal year, it's possible it could be better than that. And I think we don't want to be wildly optimistic here because we know the realities can often not meet what we're hoping they will. But there's a possibility. The funds from the stimulus package, the CRISA package that was approved in December, those will become available, we hope, sometime in the spring or late spring. Those will be part of the fiscal 22-year planning. And it's likely probably that most of those funds are not going to have much impact on the current fiscal year. However, we think that the part of that funding that's going directly to students, the 6.6 million again for Lehman students, may be available fairly soon once those funds get released. That's more straightforward. We have now a really pretty well-developed way to figure out how to distribute those funds. So I'm hoping that students will see those funds yet in the spring term. Wanted to say something about support for students because that's been on our minds so much because we've been just so aware of the challenges that students have faced in many ways, the financial ones, the academic ones of having to have all their courses online when access to broadband has been very challenging, to put it mildly, for a lot of our students, and having just the right hardware. We distributed $6.6 million of CARES Act funding in the last summer. That averaged about $500 per student who was eligible, which was a sizable percentage of our students. Some students received as much as $1,000. And as I mentioned, the new CRISA funds will allocate the same amount. And so together, of course, that really is significant. I worked with John Jay President, Carol Mason, and a couple of other CUNY presidents to draft a letter for the chancellor to send to the U.S. Department of Education asking for regulations in the CRISA funding that will allow us to directly help students with tuition, because we were very limited in what we could do with the CARES Act funding in that regard. And what we'd like to have the ability to do is help individual students with outstanding tuition. There's not going to be enough to take care of everybody's tuition bill if they allow us to do this, but certainly to help some. So that's another way that we hope that we can help students. And I just wanted to remind you too that we've continued to raise funding through the campaign for Lehman. That campaign has raised over $1 million, and some of those funds, many of them have been distributed already to students. There was $300,000 among that was designated for undocumented students that we were not able to allocate any of the CARES funding for. We are also allocating almost $1 million from the Mackenzie Scott gift over the next 18 months for the food bank and emergency microgrants. And there will also be scholarship funding that will be coming out of that major gift that we received. And we continue to work to find other ways to support students. So I think you can see from what I've just recounted to you that there's a lot that's been done. The total is around $15 million. We think that once we get the CRISA funds direct to students, and it could be more than that based on what we can do for tuition if we're allowed to do it. So there's significant amount of help that we have been able to channel directly to our students who need it. But we also are aware that as large as those sums may sound, they still are not taking care of all of our students' needs, and because those needs are tremendous. But we continue to work as hard as we can to find what we can, to do all the things we can to support them. And I want to thank all of you that are on this briefing who have helped by contributing to the campaign for Lehman or in other ways. Our students are so worthy of our support, and what we wish is that we could find more ways to do more of that. So that's what I have by way of just briefing you right now. So I want to turn to questions that are coming in, and there's a comment in here that says Robert Kennedy, and I think I must have said John Kennedy Jr., and I meant Robert Kennedy Jr. If you were, sorry about that. Yeah, Robert Kennedy Jr. is that, who was, Robert Kennedy Jr. spent many years as an environmental lawyer. He's been very involved in a lot of great things, activism around up and down the Hudson River Valley and other places. And it's really unfortunate that he's now lent his voice and the influence that he has to something that really is so unhelpful. So a question, will vaccines be made available on the Lehman campus? We've been asked to submit plans for doing that. This is vaccination is under the control of the state, and the Department of Health, you've probably noticed, has been trying to roll out many more sites. They're trying to roll out community sites in all the boroughs. And actually 2 CUNY campuses, actually, I think this was in the governor's briefing last night that he puts out every evening, that 2 of the CUNY campuses have now been opened up as vaccination sites. And I won't be surprised if Lehman College also will become one of those. We were asked to prepare plans for that and to designate where that might be. And I won't be surprised, and we'll of course be happy to do that if we can do it. We've had, from way back at the beginning of the pandemic, we've had the drive-through testing site, and I assume that's going to continue for some time. I haven't heard any direct word about that, but I assume that will continue. One of the things that's been increasingly an issue is that the distribution of the vaccine has not been what it really needed to be. And I was watching a report about this last night, actually, and there are a few examples where the distribution to communities and to populations that are vulnerable but have not really been recipients of the vaccine actually has been much better. But it really requires a lot of active work in finding ways to reach out to individuals. I've heard from numerous people that I know who are trying to get a vaccination for an elderly parent or someone they know, someone in their family who has a particular vulnerability that makes them really in the #1 group for getting the vaccine, but they're having trouble getting them. And we know that's been a problem all over the city, all over the state, and really throughout the country. So I'm hoping that Lehman can be a part of that solution going forward. So looking for, don't have more questions coming in yet. So if there's something you would like me to comment on or clarify, do let me know. Put it in the chat and I'll try to respond to it. I think we're all looking forward to a long weekend. Everybody needs that. I know. So question on spring enrollment and how that ended up. The last time I talked about that in the briefing, we were making very steady gains and enrollments were below where they had been the previous spring, but they were coming back. And I'm happy to say that that trend continued, and we came very close to our targets on enrollment for the spring. And something that, almost seemed impossible a few months ago when we were looking at the way their enrollment trends were at the time compared to the previous year. But the enrollments are back up. They're not entirely back to where they were. We had a couple of categories where they were over where they were in the previous year. New students, new freshmen, that is, was one of those areas. So overall, we were very, very close to the previous year, and so we're really happy about that. One of the things we're concerned about is students' ability to pay their tuition, which again is why I've been really concerned about making sure we have flexibility with CRISA funds coming from the federal government to help students with that as much as we can. Some other really, really great timely questions here. One is, can I comment on the delay in the pay raise for adjuncts? And what I can say is that I know this has been continued to be delayed, and there's no real change in that so far, nothing that I've heard. And I think that probably the answer to this, and more of the definitive answer to this, is going to come as the board finalizes the fiscal year 21 budget and the fiscal year 22 budget gets rolled out. And again, in March, when we find out more about what the federal package is actually going to look like. I think all of those things could impact that, because for one thing, I mean, if the state does receive a substantial amount of funding, and I don't know if you remember this, but when Governor Cuomo laid out the executive budget about a month ago, they had two scenarios. One was if they got $6 billion from the federal government in a stimulus package. Another was $15 billion. The $6 billion amount was the one that was actually used for the FY22 budget that was proposed. But right now, the Biden stimulus package has about, I think, 20 billion for New York State. So that's actually better than the best case scenario the governor had been planning for. We don't know how that will make it through Congress, but if what New York State gets is closer to that 15 billion, that's no doubt going to help. Of course, those stimulus funds are one-time funds, and one-time funds will not help in a subsequent fiscal year. And so that's going to be part of the consideration. But I think I'm hoping that we will know more about that delay and what might happen with it in March, or at least by April when the FY22 budget's approved. So another question about, will employees be allowed to continue to work from home? That is a question I think that's on the minds of many. I know some of our faculty and staff have found that working from home has actually been worked out well, and actually maybe even worked out better in some ways, not having a commute, and maybe even finding that they feel more productive in that setting. Others have not felt that way. But one of the things that we're paying attention to is trying to learn from what we've been doing and to see what is possible to carry over. CUNY had developed a new work from home policy back in the fall. And since then, there have been extensive discussions with the unions about that. Obviously, this is an issue that really needs to be in conversation with the unions, and the central administration is doing that. I don't know what will come of that, and I haven't seen the documents that have resulted. I know there's a recent document that maybe there's another round of discussion about, but I know has been pretty far along in its development. And I haven't seen it, but what I'm anticipating is that there will be some new guidelines around how we evaluate who can work at home, what are the terms of that, and then hopefully we will be able to incorporate some of the good features of what we've been doing to make people's work life better, to make us more productive. And also, I'm really thinking that in the fall, when I don't think we're going to be near to our full capacity on campus, that we can continue some form of doing that so that we can get all our work done and take care of students, while continuing to maintain our safety concerns. Also, a question about the steps that are built into the contract. Again, I think the answer to that is pretty similar, although I don't recall that the steps had been a part of the delay. I think that's something I have to check, but I don't recall that those built-in steps were part of what was delayed, but I will find out. And maybe I can report back to you in another briefing. And I think by the time we have the next briefing, I think there will be more information about that as well. So, okay, here's a really good question that has to do with testing, because testing has been one of the really very important ways that transmission has been reduced, and we haven't done testing in any systematic way at Lehman College, other than in our residence, which is just a few students, because we haven't had the kind of in-person presence that really required that. Will we have more testing as we think about a higher percentage of faculty, staff, and students on campus in the fall? I think that is quite likely. CUNY right now is, in fact, I just heard a report about this morning. CUNY is working on new testing protocols and new testing possibilities as we plan for the fall. And you're absolutely right in asking this question, that as we bring more people onto campus, testing probably needs to be part of what we're doing. One of the things, I'm going to go back, vaccination was also one of the aspects of this question. And I want to come back to vaccination just for a minute, just to point out that I think we can't count on everybody being vaccinated in the fall, but even if we could count on that, the way vaccination works is, so far, doesn't look like vaccination completely will stop the transmission of the virus. In fact, one way you could think about vaccination is that it can turn someone who's vaccinated into an asymptomatic carrier. It's pretty clear that the vaccines are almost 100% effective at preventing serious COVID illness, but they probably do not prevent people from getting infected. The studies, and I was looking at a study just this week on viral load, and it seems that people who've been immunized if they might have some virus, but the viral load is very low compared to someone who hasn't been immunized. But if they have any viral load at all, of course, it means you do have the possibility of infecting someone else. So being vaccinated protects you very, very well, but it doesn't necessarily protect everyone else. So from the standpoint of, if I'm a faculty member and I'm thinking about teaching an in-person class with students in the classroom, I want to be vaccinated, because I won't know for sure, one, what the vaccination state of all the students that are in that class is. But even if they are all vaccinated, I won't know for sure that they are completely unable to transmit that virus to someone else. So the protection, and the thing I count on, is that I'm protected because I'm vaccinated. And that gives me a lot of confidence. So I think that it's really important that we have that kind of way of understanding what vaccination does for us. It protects you. That's why you want to be vaccinated. Why do we wear masks? Well, it does protect the wearer, but it really protects all those other individuals. That's why those students that are in the class have to wear a mask and have to wear it in the right way. Because then, even if they do have a virus load, they're very unlikely to be able to transmit that virus to anybody else. We now know for certain that that is the case, that masks make a huge difference if they're worn properly and if they're the right kind of mask. Has any action been taken to improve ventilation and building readiness for the safety of the campus, especially the older buildings like Carmen and Schuster? We've done a significant amount of work on our buildings, and we actually continue to do that. One of the things that I can say with really great confidence is we've got a terrific facilities group under Vice President Rotolo, um, Robin Auchincloss, who heads facilities. We have a really great team that works under them, and they have been, as much as any campus that I have been aware of, have been so on top of our facilities and really understanding what needs to be done. That doesn't mean that we have been able to bring all of our systems up to the level of performance that we want to. And that's why we're looking at the fall term very carefully, what we can do in various spaces and what densities of faculty and students and staff we can have in various spaces, because we have to be convinced that we have the right air filtration, we have adequate airflow, and that we're bringing in as much outside air as we can. We have buildings where we have terrific control of that. Our newer buildings, the science building, we can bring 100% outside air into there and have very high rates of air exchange so that we can feel completely confident that the density of individuals in that building is really not a concern for people that are wearing masks. But other buildings are not like that. They're not as new, don't have the same kinds of ventilation systems. But it is something that we're working on. In fact, all across CUNY, this is a huge concern. You can imagine CUNY campuses, many of them are significantly older even than Lehman's campus. So, but lots of older buildings with ventilation systems that are in various degrees of having been upgraded. One of the things that we have worked on systematically at Lehman is upgrading our ventilation systems, and we continue to do that. But what I can say, and I feel really confident, is that we're very knowledgeable about the state of those systems, and we know the work that we need to do on them if there is work that needs to be done. One of the comments that I'm seeing is around, again, back to vaccinations, and noting that there are individuals among us who are not going to be candidates for vaccination. There are certain conditions, health conditions, that preclude that. And that's always going to be a concern. And that's one of the things, going back to the question of remote work, um, regardless of what the guidelines are, there always will be an avenue for someone to come to HR with whatever they need to present about particular circumstances that might prevent them from working on campus or might prevent them from working in a space that they've been designated to work. So that's always going to be there. We know that there are accommodations that we will make for certain individuals. Um, those aren't accommodations that are going to be made just because someone is worried or concerned. I think we're all worried and concerned, and we will continue to be at some level. But when there are real verified conditions, of course, those are going to be taken into account. So while I'm waiting for some other questions, I'm going to do some advertising. So we have, I mentioned that we have the vaccination town hall that's coming up. We also have the Lehman lecture coming up, and the Lehman lecture this year is our alumna, our very distinguished alumna, New York State Attorney General Letitia James, and really looking forward to that. That's going to be a discussion between the Attorney General and me, and we'll be taking questions too. So really looking forward to that. We also have a Bronx Environmental Summit that's coming up the 23rd, I believe it's the 23rd, 24th of March. Something that is really, I think, a first time for the Bronx, and that's being been put together by a whole cross-campus group, something we received funding from the Sloan Foundation to do, and also really looking forward to that. The environment and climate change is such a big issue for the world, but it's a big issue for the Bronx and our neighborhood because of the uneven way that the impacts of climate change are playing out and will continue to play out. So keep your eyes out for both of those. How will the mask policies be enforced? The mask policies will continue to be enforced the way they are now, and that is unless you have a certified reason that you cannot wear a mask, you will be required to wear one at all times. And if you do not wish to do that, you'll be asked to leave the campus. That is a zero tolerance policy, and there really just aren't going to be exceptions other than for those individuals who have a really bona fide reason, of which there are some, for not wearing a mask. The mask, as I said before, is protecting everybody else, and I would be surprised if we have members in the Lehman community who aren't concerned about everyone else that they're around, and I don't expect that to be an issue. But if it were an issue with an individual, we would ask them to leave the campus because that is just critical for keeping everyone safe. Question about the summit. It's a vaccine town hall, and it's an environmental summit that we're having. That's in March. The town hall is coming up sooner. I may be able to give you the date here in a minute for the vaccine town hall, and the summit is March 23rd and 24th, I believe. And the Lehman lecture is also in March. Let me say something about graduation too, because that's I'm just thinking about events here and advertising, and of course we have graduation coming up in May, and the ceremony will again be a virtual one. It's already well underway in terms of planning, and even though it was so disappointing last year to not be in person, it will be disappointing in the same way this year to not be in person. We still had a great commemoration of our graduates last spring, and we'll do the same thing. I think we'll have the same great kind of reception that really lets families and graduates know what a special milestone this is and how important it is. And we will do everything we can in the virtual environment to celebrate it and to acknowledge it. So the Bronx Environmental Summit is March 22 and 23. And of course, it's not going to be in person. It will be virtual. And I know that there's information that's going to be coming out very soon about that. And the vaccine town hall is scheduled for February 26th, 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. So February 26th. So that's coming up sooner. Well, maybe we've run out of questions and I've run out of things to advertise. um, one of the questions that I did an Instagram live session for students on Monday, and one of the questions that came up was around the baseball season and if we would have one or not. And as you know, or may remember, CUNY athletics have been suspended through this year, and that's another one of those activities that we're all missing. I know I miss being on the campus walk and looking down and seeing our women's uh, baseball team, softball team, I guess it is, playing, because that's a regular occurrence, and I miss just being able to pause and watch the play for a while. I'm sure we're all missing those things a lot, and looking forward to getting them back. I I don't think I'm going out too much on a limb to say that I think by the fall, hopefully we will be able to have some of these kinds of activities back, doing them in a way that's safe. But I really think that we can realistically hope to have those kind of outdoor sports coming on again, and we'll be happy. We'll be very happy to have that. Well, I don't see any other questions, and I am mindful that we do have a long weekend coming up. So, and we're getting really close to that. I want to wish you all a great weekend and hope that you get rest, and that you can take advantage of it for that, and just be refreshed when you come back on Tuesday. So, have a great evening and have a great long weekend. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks for another briefing.